We've all wanted something to watch over us. We've all wanted something to know more about us. We've all wanted something that is always there to listen. There's nothing wrong with wishing to feel safe or comfortable. There's no inherent harm in wanting a sense of stability. There's no issue in wishing for a sense of consistency in your life. Something that recognizes our face as we approach. Something that remembers that thing that we did last week. Something that can pick our voice out from all of the other noise. A symbol that shows we pay attention. A symbol that displays our belongings are precious. A symbol that reminds others we value our own safety. An image of our surroundings that we can view at any time. An image of ourselves that we can deeper analyze. An image to store away for a later date. A point of connection to our daily lives. A point of connection to all our belongings. A point of connection to our personal surroundings. Some want a network to watch over us. Some want to participate in a system of watching. Some want us all to be watched more intensely. There's something appealing about the idea of justice being served immediately. There's a perceived need to collect photographic evidence just in case. There's a belief that a system of watching can be an impartial witness. Something that can be viewed as an unbiased surveyor. Something that keeps everyone on their best behavior just with its presence. Something that is always watching everywhere that it can be. A symbol that shows we are paying attention. A symbol that affirms a convincingly objective point of view. A symbol of authority hanging over our heads as a constant presence. An image to be presented as photographic proof. An image that is always being captured 24/7. An image shared publicly to warn others how dangerous the world could be. A point of connection into a greater network. A system that feeds larger systems. A point of data that can be used to illustrate a pattern. A point on a graph that converts human characteristics into bits of data. A few want to be the ones to watch over us. A few want to control a system of watching. A few want watching to dictate the behaviors of everyone else. There's a power to be held in being the one that watches others. There's an ability to control spaces, reminding others that someone is watching where they go. There is potential to create a divide between neighbors, creating areas of selective access. Something that makes the rest of us feel uneasy about being watched. Something that reaffirms an order that places the ones who watch on top. Something that confirms that some do not have agency within public spaces while others do. A symbol to remind others they have no control over their environment. A symbol that reaffirms exactly what law and order means. A symbol to control the actions and behaviors of others. An image used to affirm a suspicion about a group of others. an image that paints someone else as the ones destroying freedom, an image that can be used against someone, a point to display publicly, a case that proves authority works, a point that presents perceived patterns as objective truths, a point of controversy in order to further fuel a divide between neighbors. As we surround ourselves with cameras and microphones, we should ask if they look down on us. Gazing down from above, every subject looks suspicious. As they build a sphere of observance, it becomes more challenging for us to find private spaces. The cameras feel less safe as we gaze down the lenses. We ponder what lies on the other side. As we stare into the glass and see ourselves, we wonder, who else is seeing this image? Is this what security feels like? Is there a person on the other side of this lens? Are they watching us with intent? Or perhaps, are they watching us to uphold the status quo? Do they see us as individuals on the other side of the lens? Do they know who we are? Do they care about our identity? Do they care about our individual well-being? Or do they care about the appearance of watching us? Do these cameras look down on us? As we surround ourselves with networks and algorithms, we should suspect that they look down on us. Gazing at points and statistics, anything can appear to be a pattern. As they build a cloud of information, it becomes harder for us to keep anything private. The network seems less friendly as we stare into our screens. We wonder where our information has ended up. As we look into our screens, we see our reflection and ponder, who else has access to our data? Is this what being connected feels like? Is there a computer on the other side of the screen? Does it recognize us? Or maybe it's just collecting information in general. Are we just an image? Are we a collection of data? Is this system accurate enough to not make mistakes? Does it know who we are? Does it know if it's seeing us for something we are not? Does it have a sense of empathy behind its programming? Does it see us all as equals? Or has it been programmed with a bias against us? What information is it keeping track of? Where is this data being stored? Who has access to this picture of us? Do they care if the picture is accurate? Do these networks look down on us? As we surround ourselves in systems and orders, we should fear that they look down on us. gazing at data in order to organize us into categories. As they build an order of punishments, the world seems less friendly as we stare into the dark. We ponder what freedoms are actually left, or if they understand what freedom means. As we think about our leadership, we struggle. Is this really what we stand for? Is this what our representation looks like? Is this the authority to watch over us? Is this what their definition of equality is? Do they see us as a person? Or do they see us as a member of a targeted group? Are they here to protect something? Is it a place, a person? Or are they here to enforce something, an ideal, a fear of someone that doesn't share their ideas? What will happen if they see us? Does authority look down on us?
Hello, Scott.
Yeah, let me switch my cameras here really quick.
Of course. I just got into the mood. I could have listened more and more. I think I just got, it was like a play, you know, I just really got into the rhythm of your spoken words. So this was your performance, Watch Over Us, Look Down on Us. So how do you feel?
I feel pretty good. I mean, I don't know. I have that rush of just like finishing something that, you know, you
Of
build up
course.
that tension and then it's sort of just released.
Congratulations. So as I said, it had this, I just got really into the rhythm, you know, I just got into the spoken word, almost like poetry in a way, this persona talking to me, you know, and sort of I felt I'm just getting to know the thoughts of this personas speaking. And well, starting, so I'll go right into my questions maybe about the performance then. So how did you choose the two personas you were showing or you created? How did you choose these two?
So I was kind of thinking about how systems kind of stack up and how they grow, and how we sort of gently sort of let things in, or maybe more accurately, things are sort of introduced to us as Trojan horses. So the first character in Watch Over Us is one that's sort of initially optimistic about surveillance technology, or at least surveillance adjacent technology. Someone who's comfortable with the idea that their phone recognizes them, that their laptop recognizes them, that their other devices recognize them, that their smart speaker can like pick out their voice no matter what's happening in their home. And then it sort of eventually builds to the sort of acceptance for these technologies out in public. And while they're really sort of comforting on an individual level, on a societal level, you kind of have to figure that as uncomfortable as the thought is that perhaps like your safety and your comfort is like costing someone else their safety or their comfort. And it's a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around. Well, it's not a hard thing to wrap your head. Well, it is. It's a thing a lot of people are struggling with right now, is this sort of idea of privilege, right? The sort of thing that like, if I feel safe and if this feels good to me, it should feel good for everyone. And that's not necessarily a universal truth. And look down on us as sort of more of an exploration of not people embracing the technology, but sort of the people that have been held down by the technology as it sort of, as it grows and it ramps up, how things become more oppressive, how this idea of sort of authoritarianism kind of slides up on us. And in ways we can get really excited about parts of it because, I mean, I think we all sort of a little bit on the inside like the idea of sort of instant justice. I mean, I think there's so many things happening in the world right now where we do wish for instant justice. But I don't know, there's so many cases
especially currently, right? So, and there's no justice coming in many cases. There's no immediate justice, and there's not even a midterm justice being considered. So, but this is, and this is what I said, I got really into the spoken word, into the rhythm. I was following the logic. I was sort of getting to know the personas speaking, and we'll get to the content, but also this was the spoken word, this was the sort of the personalities you were talking about, but also in terms of the visualization of these personas, the underlying, I mean, you work with data sets and you just didn't make up these personas, but the underlying data set. Can you maybe give us a little bit of keywords in the description? How did the form, how did you get these forms of these people, these faces? How were they constructed?
Yeah, so the first character that everyone saw was sort of a complete imagined character. So it didn't draw from any data sets specifically, but it was something that I constructed. So I used 3D modeling software. And I was sort of thinking about like what the evolution of a person that like sort of fully embraces the idea of like watching others would be. And there's sort of that point where you tip over from like being a really human figure to being something that's more of a machine or something that's almost more of a monster. So that was sort of the initial inspiration between sort of the cameras sort of like popping out of the eyes. I don't know, I almost was thinking about like a snail. And then the logic behind the mouth being sort of a television screen. Just that fact that like there's people that are starting to only see things through like camera lenses and only speak out through screens, or at least it feels that way, right? We have people that we see that almost like intake this information and just dump it back out on screens without really processing it.
I mean, this is the consumer, right? This is the ideal consumer. You consume, you don't process. This is how you essentially being sold, right? So it's like the ideal world. This is the ideal case, and essentially, this is what you pay technology. This is why. What do you exchange money for, right? This ideal scenario, and you do not buy, and you're not being compensated for the negative parts, right? You just buy the sort of the positive part of that technology.
Yeah, and not only like the buying of like the gadgets and the consumer devices, but also sort of the buying into ideas that media companies might sell you, ideas around paranoia, ideas that the world out there like isn't safe or that your neighbor is dangerous. I mean, there's so many things out there that if you tune in, they'll tell you that the world is just like a dangerous and evil place for anyone that's not like you, which I would hope isn't true. But then, so the other character in Look Down on Us is constructed from a data set. So I really got curious when I was sort of researching for this project about facial recognition and sort of like the origins of it. And I ended up looking for data sets, sort of early data sets that might be open sourced. And I didn't find a lot. Or if I did find them, they were sort of focused on like crowd recognition, and they were about 10 years old. But I found this data set from MIT's, what is it? It's like computational biology and computer learning lab. So in 2004, they created this data set with images of 10 different students. And essentially, the goal of the data set was to construct 3D heads, right? So they took 324 images of each of these 10 students, and they made a software program to construct sort of a way to identify a head from any angle, or at least a face from any angle that you could perceive it. So I got really kind of curious about these individual students as almost sort of, in a weird way, kind of patron saints, because we kind of owe them in a weird way. But I also sort of wanted to like recreate this idea of like taking a selection of source images and sort of expanding on it to create a data set that could be more universal, right? So the fact that like MIT with this bit of research was like trying to figure out a way to catch faces from different angles. I was really concerned if I could take images of these 10 students, process them through neural networks, which basically, instead of viewing images as pixels, views images as different bits of data, right? So instead of seeing an image as like blue pixel here, green pixel here, etc., like a computer would normally process images, or at least, raster images that we're used to. Instead, it sort of processes qualities, right? So this one that I used an open tool, or at least open to the web. It was called ArtBreeder, and essentially it's mostly focused on portraits. So the idea being that like you could upload a picture of yourself and like your favorite painting, and it would pop out an image of like, here's what you would look like if you were painted by Van Gogh or whatever. And the reason it was interesting to me is because when you have something that's open like that and there's so many people uploading photos, you get a really diverse data set, right? So you weren't just getting like this sort of small selection of 10 students. And not to say that the MIT data set wasn't diverse in any way. For a selection of like 10 computer science students, it's like impressively diverse, but there's still gaps in it, right?
But it's so just a brief description of these 10 students, which is, as you said, it's not a big focus group, so to say. It's not a big selection. It's 10, but it's basically approximately one age group, correct? So it's students.
Yeah, so they're all early 20s. They're baby faces. And I sort of wanted to process this out and sort of see if I could like take this image set and get one that was more universal. And that was the collection of images that I collaged to create the look down on this character. Because I think it was important for me to try to create something that wasn't speaking from a kind of singular identity. I needed to create a character that was very much a we identity. And part of that is incorporating different elements, different genders.
Again, a we identity from that limited data set, correct?
Yeah.
So,
and of course, like it's sort of creating this almost fictional thing, right? It's something that's like sort of all encompassing. It's a character that's almost everyone in a weird way, even though it's sort of just a single individual. And then stylistically with that one, the reason I chose sort of photo collage as the method for creating it is, when you think about photo collage, you're sort of cutting out these bits and pieces from an image in order to construct the image that you want. And I think that's the really scary thing about sort of scaled surveillance technology, is the idea that someone can be cutting out tiny bits of images or videos or data and assembling them into their own data sets that present non-truth as something scientific.
And so I would like to take this conversation point and basically, so we had a conversation before the performance, and so looking at your work, it's very much informed by surveillance technology, right? By presenting it in one way and the other. And in this today, it was the performance. So what triggered your interest? What was the sign that you, I mean, almost, can you say obsessed, or very much obsessed in many ways, because it formalizes in different ways. It formalizes in your way, work on surveillance and sculpture and photography and video and performances. So you express that subject, yeah. I'm not even saying it's a concern in these different matters, but what was the trigger that you thought surveillance technology to make it such a big part of your work?
So the big part of it was my daily commute, right? So I was in university and undergrad, and I lived in the suburbs, and I was taking the train to the city every day to go to school. And there's a big sort of, if it's not really a surveillance presence per se, but at least the signs that go with it, right? So there's always a sign that you're sort of being watched on the train. There's always sort of all these notifications around train stations and bus stations that you're being watched, right? Or at least they want to give you the perception that you're being watched. But there was this kind of uncomfortable thing that kept happening, right? So I would get emergency text updates from the university I was going to, and there would always be these stories about like people getting groped at the train station or flashers at the train station. And in my head, I sort of had this assumption that like, okay, like these cameras have to have like faces to that, right? I mean, these email alerts are clearly just like someone's personal description of what happened. But if it's happening at like a public bus stop and there's these like dome cameras all over, like at one point they would have to have an image, or at least have to have like video knowing that someone went in a certain direction. But the thing that got me is like I never heard about any sort of, you know, solution to it. And there's also that really uncomfortable factor that like you would be encouraged to believe that the system of like security cameras and signage and this really sort of heavy, I mean, security theater is the word, right? So this like sort of feeling that like, yes, this is like deeply observed and watched. I mean, it would kind of, it made me feel like it wasn't being watched. And then I started to kind of notice from there that it wasn't just sort of like my commute at the train stations and on the trains and buses where I was seeing these cameras, but it was like all over the city when I was walking around. And that's kind of what cued like the initial body of work, which was building these mock cameras. So I had silk screened a template for myself that was like a cut and fold template. And essentially it became sort of a street art project, but it was also a photography project. So there was sort of these multiple levels to it. The initial level is like, you know, making the fake camera and then putting it up in public, right? It's clearly a symbol that doesn't, I mean, it doesn't do anything, right?
Is it a call, like how do you go about it as an artist? And is your work calling for any sort of activism, a call to action? Are you sort of trying to trigger it, or are you staying away from that? It's like, or how do you see that in like your work with relationship to like social activism? I'd say it's a good steps away from it, because it's just, there are beautiful objects involved. There's really like thought to that object and to that staging, but still I would love to hear you're thinking with your work with regard to social activism?
Yeah, so it's an element that I feel like becomes more and more integrated as I make more work around this sphere. I mean, at first, when I was addressing sort of the idea of surveillance, it was coming from a really sort of like privileged perspective of like, oh yeah, like these cameras see me running around the city, but they can't do anything about what I do. Like, you can't control me. But
in fact, I asked you that before. Did you try to hide? So when it got to you, when you understood surveillance technology and sort of the defining purpose of these cameras installed, did you try to hide from it actively? Did you go down that route as well, trying to basically forego any information of you being captured on camera? Was there a thought of that?
I mean, like, so initially it was like the opposite idea, right? So I had these like fake paper cameras and I was trying to like be all up in the security cameras by like, installing these kind of joke cameras. But then, I mean, about a year after, and to kind of put it in context, like this is all happening right after Edward Snowden had kind of like revealed things about us to the NSA. And at that point, it kind of started to process to me like the difference between security cameras and surveillance. And that's when I really started to kind of like get a little more concerned. And I don't know, I almost like tried to plan routes around it to see if I could avoid it. But it's a really futile thing in a way, like, unfortunately. I mean, it's just something that like, it's so integrated into the cityscape that if you want to be in a large metropolitan downtown area, like you're not going to avoid surveillance. And if you want to make technology art like I do, or if you want to use technology as part of an artwork, it starts to become really unavoidable. I mean, Apple, Microsoft, and Google all sort of have their mini surveillance amphitheaters around us. And of course, like that's in the consumer sphere. I mean, at least as far as we know. The reason they're watching us is to sell us more products, right? If your iPhone like keeps track of your health for you every day, and then you're like, oh man, I feel like I'm healthier because I have an iPhone, like the next time you go to purchase a cell phone, you'll probably get an iPhone.
And I feel so. This is also why I was also very excited to see your performance. Is also the text, because you went from the way as in 3D printing cameras, installing them, analyzing data, to actually words, right? To actually like the spoken words, giving words and a voice to your characters. And it's not that you taken a transcript from, I don't know, consumer advertising, and then another transcript of I don't know, of a social activist asking questions, but it's your authorized voice that you gave to these two personas. And how did you come that way from basically analyzing data and being a more like on the analyzing end to giving voice and choosing words? And so also when looking at the two personas that were speaking, obviously, right, it's this question of being on control and who has control over me and what does it do, versus like this friendly attitudes that are always being put forth by everyone advocating for technology and by the use and the use of surveillance and for security cameras. So how you as an artist, and I'm interested less of, let's say, an active voice against or for technology, like you as a voice as an artist, how did you choose the words, right? How did you make that selection? Is it purely authored by you, or how did you ask these questions? How did you come to ask these questions that you did?
I mean, I think for me right now, I think authorship has sort of become more important in my work as of recent. So I just got done with a large project, like a large sort of narrative video game project. And before that, I was always really concerned about like objects doing storytelling, or in bigger cases, it'd be like environments doing storytelling, right? So if you like walk into a room, like that would tell the story for you. Right now in 2020, I don't feel like that's as accessible. Um, so I've been trying to kind of convert, and I feel like it's something like hopefully we'll come back into those other things. I would love to make like an installation with this sort of storytelling and character, but I think that's something that's really important for me right now, is that like artworks don't just like, they're not just like objects, but instead there's characters and stories in there. So it's sort of this, at least I see it as a progression from like trying to storytell with just like an object, sort of expanding to trying to storytell with space. And I think right now I'm really obsessed with like trying to storytell with multiple characters.
But it's also very human, right? So if we come from the machine to the human again, to your voice again, when we were preparing the performance, I asked you, are you using an interface for your voice? Are you using, I don't know, Alexa's voice? Are you using some sort of voice? But it was your voice, right? Your real human voice that you, and this is a choice that you made directed, right? So it's I don't know, bring back the human into that sort of data analysis and that sort of purely analytical framework, I don't know, of surveillance data. I'd say. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think like at the end of the day, I mean, like humans are the crucial part of it, right? Like, um, I could live without without technology. I mean, I might struggle a little bit, but like I couldn't live without people. Um, and yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's crucial to have like people and identities in the stories that I'm telling now.
And even further, not, I mean, you've chosen like the one you completely set up, the one persona, and the second one was based on an MIT data set, but given your voice. And as you said, you just finished a big project, a big game that you created. And this also involves a lot of storytelling. And can you maybe give us what started you, or what, how did it start that you would create a game and also again create different personas and create these different characters? And what's the underlying story? So what is this game solving, or what is it bringing on the way? So what is the narrative of that story that you finished?
Yeah, so the game is titled Changing Wilds, and it's a speculative fiction about climate change. So in this world, you're sort of dropped in an environment, and the only things aside from the environment that's there, obviously, but the only thing that's sort of moving and living in there, aside from you as the first person character, is these sort of animal creatures. And as you follow these animal creatures like down the path they're guiding you on, you're sort of revealed a spoken word story. And the spoken word story sort of tells the story, this kind of transformation from like a Mother Earth creature that's sort of, you know, acting as a hostess for us, right? Letting us live here, to a character that I kind of like to call Monster Earth, right? This thing that just like doesn't have patience for us anymore, that's been sort of triggered and cornered by our actions. So the game sort of ramps up both visually and in terms of like storytelling as the world catches on fire, which ironically enough, like while I was working on that project, the world started to literally catch fire.
Very timely, very scary, very timely, Scouse. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I was 3D modeling these like sick, infected like deserts and these like
And you
flaming
started
mountains.
in February, right? You said you started designing and laying
Yeah,
out
so
characters and the narrative in February.
I pitched
This
it in
year.
January this year. I pitched it in January and I started building it in February. Um, and then yeah, everything kind of fell down. And initially, like I had the idea that it was going to be like an in-space sort of like you have to go to a location to play this like shorter game experience. But it's part of like doing things online. It sort of gave me the chance to sort of expand it, and it really became this sort of longer narrative story versus this thing that in my head initially was sort of short. Um, I don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the things that like despite everything negative that's come out of like the past couple of months, like a really positive thing, at least for me, is I've had time to sort of like focus on things that are really narrative driven and really story driven and character driven versus some of my previous works that were really like data driven or object driven.
This is, and so also your remark about that you would like to install um, these personas and basically stories in a physical space, right? So we didn't get, this was a remark that you made earlier, basically to install it in a physical space so that people could go and listen to stories. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have it as like a dual channel video installation. I think that's like after doing the performance, I think that's like the next step that lives in my head. I'd love for the two to be, I mean, because that was initially the thing that sort of popped up in my head was, I mean, it's almost appropriate for tonight because it's the presidential debate, but almost sort of these two like figureheads kind of debating these like opposite sort of paths they've written down, right? So the one's sort of been developed by sort of the consumer side of surveillance, and the other one's sort of been driven by the public political side of surveillance, and they both sort of reached this peak where they're sort of um, almost shouting at each other about like how awful things are and how much they need to have control over it.
So I'm also, that's what I've seen in your work and when you were talking about the game, which is also super interesting how you develop the characters around it, that this need to storytell and to basically come back to the individual, right? So instead of looking as a general, I don't know, data set and not seeing, and this was one of the questions also that catch my eyes, do they see me as an individual? I think this was one of part of the performance in being am I being looked at as an individual or am I only a data point? And I think this is interesting that you come from that general data points that where you speak basically in trends or in general assumptions and sort of bottom line that you come to these individuals, right? That have a story, that have this this background, and I also love, and I thought this is also interesting when you work when you can go into the into your website. Also sort of the ironic twist on technology, right? So when you set up and the sculptural feel of your work when you install, so it's not void of the human, it's very much present of your artistic language, how you install the cameras and how you also set up this model camera that you 3D printed, this mimicking the technology in an object. Yeah, so it's basically that you understand it's becoming like iconic. It's like this iconic image, and so when you were, and we spoke about this work where you have the different cameras and the useless cable that leading no way, can you maybe give me a little bit, like, can you describe maybe to the audience that is watching, what was your intent and how do you go about installing that kind of work?
Yeah, so the one thing that's like always sort of crucial for when I'm making work that addresses these sort of like technological questions, or these really these human questions within technology, would probably be a better way to put it. But there always has to be some form of like some form of participation in that system by the work itself. So in this case, for the performance, right, I'm using facial recognition technologies in real time to sort of capture what my face is doing and what I'm saying. But also I'm using like image recognition technology to sort of construct some of the characters. And in previous works, especially like the camera installation that you're talking about, that one, it was really sort of, it was crucial to have like an image in the space. I'd collected a data set of like news headlines about surveillance and sort of deconstructed patterns that I'd seen in it. So when you see surveillance headlines, good or bad, it always sort of talks about like a subject, a place, and then an action. So like a masked man enters a bank would be like an example headline. So I had constructed a sort of fake news generator that sort of constructed these surveillance things, these surveillance headlines. But the important twist on that one was that it integrated things that used you or your. So all of a sudden the headlines like about like, oh, like your brother enters a gas station, and you sort of, it personifies it, right? We have this technology that really sort of like, it's really good for like being made of cameras. It's really good at dehumanizing people. And it was an important thing to sort of drag like the viewer back into that and sort of put this in this kind of surreal place, so that like one screen has this collection of like amalgamated headlines. The second screen has these sort of constructed fictional headlines. And then the third and final screen, like you look and you see yourself in it. So like you're seeing yourself in the situation on one camera with a sort of virtual, it had a Snapchat filter that ran on it. So there was text kind of circling your head when you look in the one screen. And then in the other screen, you're sort of seeing these constructed stories that involve you or people that you know. And then it sort of is kind of the most distant, but it still has images of the space that you're in. So it has these like headlines that you might have read recently, and it has a captured image of like the gallery space that you're in. And it's sort of, I don't know, a lot of it's kind of about, I don't know that I like the term because it has a lot of like sort of other implications, but that kind of like schizophrenic viewpoint where you're seeing multiple things at a single time.
But as well, you, right? It's not only.
Yeah, but it's also only centered around you as the viewer.
So it's not just you as an observer, but you become the subject of it. And I think that's the consumption again. Yeah, it's a comment also on how we consume news, right? So we just consume it, we don't get to process it, right? And when you see that, and if you see yourself being reflected in a camera and a screen, and then, I don't know, a headline pops up with information sort of relevant, sort of pseudo-relevant around you. I think that's a really interesting twist. And also how you ordered it on the wall. I thought that was something very uncanny when you look at all your objects that you create. There's something really, it's this art term that we like to use, but it's still very uncanny. It's like the same way, I think that runs through your work, the same way your spoken words was, when it's like, I was just warming up, I just wanted to hear more. Yeah, so it's this, you get in this routine, and and you're warming up to it, but it's also this uncanny feeling about all that you're part of, right? So you're also part of that surveillance. You consume that surveillance. You consume the headlines, and you're just being basically bombarded by it. I wanted, so we don't have much time left, and I wanted to bring up a question that we got is, how do you see the characters evolving in a future edition? What other types of characters' voices do you see emerging or entering into the conversation, Scott?
Oh man, I mean it's kind of tricky because there's like I feel like this one was so constructed around this sort of almost a dichotomy that I'd constructed around it. But yeah, I'm sort of, I'd be curious about sort of like what in a conversation in between more characters, like I feel like I would probably break these ones up a little bit. There's sort of as it ramps up in the spoken word, it sort of gets into an almost authoritarian territory, and I think it'd be really interesting to see more empathetic characters sort of trying to deal with more authoritarian characters. But yeah, I don't know, that is, it makes me curious now, like what other components can there be? Because I have sort of constructed a dichotomy that has like kind of these two sides to it.
So it has space maybe for other characters, right? So and another question is, as you said, you've been on your personal, so it's not just because in theory you were interested in surveillance technology, but actually you experienced that that gap between what you saw in terms of what surveillance technology or security technology should be doing versus your own experience as a student while commuting, while getting these reports of attacks or on people in public places. And so another question, the ways in which either surveillance has influenced our contemporary visual culture. Would you know an answer to that? Do you see ways how it has influenced?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is sort of the I mean, there's definitely a culture of sort of this voyeurism or like feed watching to notice sort of a larger pattern. I think there's sort of a habit of viewing, especially like through apps like Instagram or Tumblr, even in their kind of their web forms. There's this need that like it's not necessarily about like it's not appreciating like an object just or an object as an artwork per se, but as sort of like I don't know, if you're interested in an artist, you almost have to follow them on these platforms. You have to follow what they're doing. And in a weird way, like I think we've seen sort of more sort of personality-based artists come through. I think Molly Soda is like a really interesting example to like pull one just at random. Just because the work sort of is this kind of crafted persona, this like what does the most internet person look like? And like that's who Molly Soda sort of became, right? Molly Soda had to be like the e-girl. like and I think that's like a huge thing that like has been a shift in visual culture is if you don't think about artists all the time necessarily as like sort of just about their work, but there's a lot of artists that are sort of like connected with their persona. And I think I mean, not to say that like there hasn't been artists that are constructed with the persona in the past. I think there's a lot of like really vivid examples that we can think of, but I think it's something that's almost more commonplace now that like you almost have to be. It'd be really hard. I mean, I guess like Banksy might be the one example that like doesn't do it at all, but I mean, you have to be connected to your persona. You can't just be like a body of work anymore. you have to be a person, and you have to kind of be active. And I don't know,
Represent, represent in
yeah,
one way or the other.
and it's a weird struggle because for a while, like, I don't know, being kind of concerned about privacy in some ways. For a while, I was like, yeah, I can't be a part of these systems. Like, I can't be on social media, and I can't, like, I don't know, I can't, like, be a part of the work myself. I don't know, you have to shatter those. And yeah, I mean, like, part of the works now, it's like very crucial that they're active in the internet in ways, and that they are participatory in the systems that they comment on.
And I think in the pre-conversation we had is that I thought it was a beautiful sentence that you made. Is I felt like I needed my voice, my own personal voice, more heard. As in when we were talking about your path from analyzing data to actually like giving, like writing the text, and coming, like not using a synthesizer, not using any interference mechanisms, but actually making your voice, your own voice heard. And I thought this was also, I mean, it's a very personal statement, and I thought this was very beautiful, so that you don't reclude, but you actually participate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I mean, yeah, now more than ever, it feels kind of crucial to be kind of integrated in the work in that way. I was thinking of something and it just like drifted right out of my head.
We have basically not much time left. If so, I'm actually, I think I have to say my thank yous. And Scott, so you'll be in San Francisco at the mini residency at the Villa till Thursday. Thank you so much for preparing the performance and sharing it with us, and bringing back again to to the processing of information, and bringing the attention for this afternoon back to art and to your work. Thank you very much for doing that. Well, we are excited, I think, for any gallery, for any museum to open back again. And actually, that's what you said. It's actually triggered the idea of you installing that work in a physical space, and having people run through it and experience your work in a physical space. And I think this is really exciting, basically, sort of as a to look forward to, right? And for you to work on elaborating personas, and to eventually even add more voices, your own voices and other voices to your work. Scott, thank you very much. I really loved the conversation with you. And well, thank you. Thanks everyone for watching, and thanks Candice, and thanks Villa for organizing the talk and having Scott in San Francisco, and on such a day as today, right? So I think it's 9 p.m. Eastern time already. So Scott, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Villa. Thanks to Reriddle. And yeah.
And well, fantastic. This was an afternoon filled with art while museums slowly reopen and galleries reopen. Thank you, Candice of Reriddle, for the opportunity to talk with Scott. Thank you. Have a good night.